Well, here at the Monarch Public House, we've got the side room over here, which had originally been a grocery store from the 1890s until about the late 1980s. When we got here and bought the place in 1995, this side was an antique shop, and it had a drop ceiling and it had gray tile floors, white walls, and radiators. And I said, well, we're going to make a few changes here, and we knocked a hole in the wall. You're probably wondering about my friend here. This is Big Red. And Big Red is an Irish dragon. And when dragons show up at your door and say, hey, I'm looking for a place to stay, you try to accommodate them. And dragons have a huge history in Ireland lore, just like they did in China, or they did in England or Wales and so forth. In Ireland, dragons with legs are land dragons and are considered protectors of the land and the people upon it. The serpents, which come from the sea or from the water, they have no legs, hence serpent, and those aren't as friendly. So there's a lot of stories about dragons and about the paths where they go. Have you ever heard the phrase, I'm going to get the lay of the land? Well, that comes from the ancient Celt lay, L-E-Y, which meant path or path of power. And where the dragons would go, that was a lay. And the Druids would then hold their ceremonies, or that's maybe where you got married, or where you would build along a path of power. Now, dragons, much like the leprechauns, the pixies, the elves, pukas, all the things of mythical legend, come from the other world. And the other world is very close to our world. And the way that you're able to go back and forth for these magical creatures is through very deep holes, like a well, or a tunnel, or a cave, anything like that. That's where the other world comes in contact with our world. So they can very easily go back and forth. It may be why you haven't seen a pixie, an elf, or a leprechaun, or even a dragon, because you're not next to a hole. So anyhow, dragons, very much part of legend and lore. Where my ancestors come from, the Harringtons, are on a very, very small island at the end of Bantry Bay where Cork and County Kerry meet. And it's called Barra. And the O'Sullivans and the Harringtons are generationally from that area. And there's a lot of mining in that area, so obviously there's a lot of holes. And that would be where a lot of dragons would come and go. Back in the days of the rebellion against the British Empire, Barra Island was particularly well known for being a home of rebellion. Gee, can you imagine that, an Irishman being rebellious? And because they were able to hide in the mine shafts and the holes and so forth, whenever the Brits would come in to maybe put down the rebels and hang a few, they'd be taking pot shots at the redcoats. And it got to a point where the Marines and the landing soldiers wouldn't go in anymore because it was the land of the dragons. And so they'd stand offshore and fire a few cannons in to soften the area up before they went in. And as I was growing up, I grew up next door to my great-grandmother, who would always say, no, you behave yourselves or we'll put you outside tonight for the dragons and you'll be living with them from now on. So dragons were a part of my growing up. And when Big Red here, who by the way, his real name is Padraig Joseph Pendragon, came and asked for, wanted to stay here because we have his cousin O'Hegarty out on the sign outside who takes care of the security of our garden. We were of course very happy to have him here. So Big Red here is a big part of the Monarch Public House, and there's a lot more stories about Big Red and the Monarch Public House, and we'll talk about some more of those next time. Sláinte.